Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. This week marked the beginning of the 2020 legislative session and the unveiling of Governor Henry McMaster's executive budget. There's more money in the state budget, $1.8 billion more. How will legislators deal with the surplus, and how will it impact education reform, which will once again take center stage at the State House? Lawmakers returned to Columbia this week to start the final year of their two-year legislative session. Senators caught up before the clock struck noon, and then shortly thereafter, Senate President Harvey Peeler took to the dais, escorted by the Sergeant-at-Arms, and gave a welcome-back address to his 45 colleagues.
Our economy is hitting on all cylinders. We have $1.8 billion surplus money this year. When I say we have, that's a misnomer. They have. The citizens of this state.
Governor Henry McMaster echoed that sentiment earlier in the week when talking about his budget.
Fund our critical needs and return the rest back to the taxpayers. That is, the government should not take more than it needs to fund the critical needs of the state. We could always find things to spend money on. We could gold plate the dome if we wanted to, but that's not a critical need.
The 124 lawmakers in the House were also in session this week. While their colleagues in the Senate began debating their version of the education bill, House members with the House Ways and Means Committee were at work crafting their version of the $10 billion budget, which will have some overlap with the governor's proposal. Lawmakers in both chambers will soon start looking into the future of state-owned utility Santee Cooper, and debate regarding the fetal heartbeat abortion bill, which is currently on the Senate floor, is expected this session, though Democratic filibuster will likely prevent its passage. Several other issues will be at play throughout the session that ends on May 14th, including the fact that all lawmakers are up for re-election this June. Joining us to preview this year's legislative session are two reporters covering the State House. They are Jeffrey Collins with the Associated Press and Maayan Schechter with the State Newspaper. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Gavin.
We are up and running at the State House this week, y'all. And with that, there's a lot going on, especially when we talk about the budget. The governor released his executive budget earlier this week, Jeffrey, and it also includes what to do with an additional $1.8 billion surplus. Can you kind of tell us about what that money is, whether it's one-time dollars, recurring, and where we're trying to see some of those things go, at least in his budget proposal?
Yeah, the money's split into kind of two pots. There's about $1 billion, which is one-time money, which is kind of like when you get a bonus at work. It's just one time, you spend it and it's gone. The additional $800 million or so is in recurring money. That's money that the state's getting in additional taxes, and additional fees. Part of it's because the economy is booming in South Carolina and it continues to grow, so more people are paying taxes. That expands that account. The $1 billion worth that's just the one-time money, you can look at that. That's probably stuff you want to spend on things like roads, decaying buildings, stuff that you just have to pay for one time. The $800 million is stuff that you want to spend, things that happen over and over again. So like if you wanted to raise teacher salaries or state employee salaries or hire additional troopers for the state's roads, you need money that comes back every year. So that's what that $800 million is about.
And Maayan, when we look about the governor's proposal, this is just his proposal. This isn't like the final budget. So people need to understand maybe how this goes from here and what this is.
Right. I mean, it's a spending wish list. It's what the governor would like the legislature to spend the roughly $10.2 general fund budget on this coming year, and in a budget that takes effect July 1. And I think it's also important to note that, especially in the recurring dollars, a lot of this money, while it feels like a lot of money that is coming into the state coffers, a lot of that recurring dollars has already sort of been checked off to the side for salary increases, for health care costs. So I think that's important to keep in mind, especially for those who don't follow the budget at the State House. A lot of that money is already reserved for the costs that the state has to pay for every year, or says they're going to pay for every year.
Some sort of things like Medicare costs and employee
inflation.
Yeah.
Right.
Stuff just costs
the
more
reserve fund.
Right.
I mean, things you have to kind of take right off the top and put away. But the good thing is we have plenty of money compared to some other states where they're facing budget cuts. Like I think in Georgia, they're looking at budget cuts. So things that we don't have to worry about. But Maayan, when we look at what the governor proposed, what's the reaction been that you've heard so far from lawmakers up at the State House? And we saw some of that, I guess working together last year on the governor's budget proposals. Are we feeling some of the same vibes up here already with this budget proposal?
Yeah, I think the governor's office has worked pretty hand in hand with State House leaders in both chambers, particularly in the House, because the budget obviously starts in the House and not the Senate. I think that we're going to continue to see some of the priorities that the governor put in his budget, very similar to last year, make it into the actual spending plan that the House writes and that the Senate also has a hand on. There could be some differences in some of the ways that the money kind of trickles down, but I think we'll see the same. One lawmaker told me that he felt like this budget for the first time like really focuses on core functions of government. We're seeing more money put to deferred maintenance at state-owned buildings. We're seeing another emphasis on keeping college tuition costs low. We're seeing more money put toward the Department of Corrections, which has been underfunded for years. So I certainly think that there are lawmakers who are looking at this budget and at least feeling like it hits all the points that they want to make. There are definitely going to be differences of opinions, though, when it comes to things like tax relief for certain groups. This rebate check, I'm sure, is going to also cause some kind of debate in the House and the Senate. But all in all, I've not heard anything terrible yet. It's still early.
And there's plenty of money to go around too, so everyone seems like they're pretty happy with it. I know we always say more money, more problems, but it seems like if everyone kind of gets a little bit of what they want, it seems to work out. But Jeffrey, right now the House Ways and Means Committee is meeting their subcommittees because they have the first strike of the budget. They craft the big budget, and then they debate it, they vote on it, and they send it to the Senate. They do the same thing, and then the conference committee later on the session. But I want to see what kind of sticking with the governor's proposal, since that's what we have right now. What are the summer priorities that you deduced from his proposal? I mean, Maayan was talking about tax rebates, and that's something he's always been big on, tax cuts as well. I'm just wondering what the traction might be for those. And we did get, taxpayers did get money back last year because of the Mega Millions winner. So I'm wondering if that's some sort of, it's propelling him to think, hey, people want more money back because we have so much more money.
Yeah, I think there will be a very vigorous debate on taxes in this session. The question is, what direction do people decide to go? The governor likes the rebates, liked them last year. Sent $50 to every filer in South Carolina. The question becomes, though, there's some other people, like especially Senate Republican leadership, that want, and House leadership too, want to look at restructuring taxes altogether in South Carolina. I mean, maybe we can shift away from property taxes, cut income taxes. And one of the governor's proposals is he would like over 5 years to cut more than $2 billion worth of taxes out of the government entirely. And that's going to take a lot of work, and I think there's the ability to do it in this session. Maybe we'll have to see, but in the end, you're going to have this fundamental argument over whether you give like a one-time rebate to people, whether you do this long term. And then on the other side of things, Democrats are like, the reason we have the surplus is we haven't spent very much. There's all these needs in the state, from Medicaid to decaying buildings to decaying roads. And, yes, we have this money, we need to spend it on these needs. So.
Yeah, and that's what we'll see them start chopping that up too as we go forward. One of the big needs, and we can kind of go through sections of the budget, is education. We'll talk about education reform in the Senate bill in a moment, but what we're seeing in the governor's budget is, again, another heavy education budget. He's proposing $3,000 teacher pay raises for every teacher in the state, wants to expand 4K kindergarten, put more school resource officers in schools, mental health counselors, stuff that we saw kind of in his budget last year, Maayan, including more school buses. And I thought it was interesting, $400 for every teacher to use for school supplies so that they can get reimbursed from their school districts. So again, kind of covering ourselves in case something big doesn't happen on education reform. We can see something happening, at least in the budget, have another education budget, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's been the argument of some lawmakers who also oversee the education committees, is that you can really affect you can create more change by way of the budget in terms of actually spending dollars on things that matter to these teachers, like being able to afford school supplies, like being able to get more money into their paychecks so that they can, not have to seek out second or third jobs. So yeah, I think you're right. If the Senate or if an education bill does not become law this year, which we've also heard from lawmakers that it's not a reform bill, it's kind of cleaning out the pipes, if you will, and fixing or tweaking some things, that this budget is set to help out mitigate some of the problems that teachers have complained about over the past year.
And one interesting dynamic of the whole salary discussion, raising teacher salary, is the governor's budget is an across-the-board raise for all teachers.
Yeah.
Right.
But then also in the governor's budget, he proposes a raise for state employees, but he proposes sending that money to the agency heads in one pot, and they can determine maybe somebody gets a 6% raise and somebody gets nothing. Now, Greg Hembry, who's the leader of the Senate Education Committee, his idea on teacher raises is do the same thing that the governor wants to do with state employee raises. Send that pot of money to the district, let the district determine maybe they want to give a 10% raise to a physics teacher that they need really bad, or pay special education teachers more because they're struggling to have those positions filled. So that's going to be a very interesting philosophical debate. I mean, is it okay to give merit raises only to state employees, but across the board raises to teachers, vice versa? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And there's also, I mean, I think on top of that, there's the other pushback that there are districts in this state that on their own have been able to unilaterally give out pay raises far beyond what the state has been able to do themselves. So I've heard from teachers, is it fair to give across the board raises to every single teacher, no matter what district they're in? Because some districts are able to pay that, and the state doesn't have to. So I think it's a weighty debate on it's going to be an interesting debate.
And that's about a
forward.
$211 million proposal too. So I mean, it's kind of interesting to see. You know, that's a huge chunk of the budget, and there was a big rollout before session started about that proposal too. And a big move behind that was to also get the teachers' average pay up and more competitive with the national average too, which is something that they always rank teacher pay against in South Carolina. But since you brought up merit-based pay for potential for state employees, Jeffrey, the governor did propose $33 million for that. So I'm wondering, again, these are all his proposals, but do we see some traction for that for all these employees in the state who really haven't seen many raises? They've seen these one-time bonuses. But I mean, we've heard from Democrats and Republicans in support of some sort of pay raise for state employees.
Yes, when they were previewing the legislative session with the several lawmakers, both Democratic and Republican, mentioned that state employees are, their pay has fallen behind. They just haven't gotten the kind of raises that other people in private industry or even teachers now have gotten over the past 10, 15, 20 years. So I think there will be some traction to give state employee raises. Again, the question is what form does it take? A second question is, one of the wild cards of last year's legislative session was how quickly teachers organized themselves into these grassroots groups like SC for Ed. They pushed the education debate last year when they were able to come together. I mean, they had 10,000 people to their rally at the State House, which in my mind was the largest gathering they've had there since the 2000 Martin Luther King Day rally to take the flag off the Confederate flag off the dome. So if state workers get that kind of grassroots organization together, they can push a lot of things if they want to this year. I mean, there are some legislators that would disagree, but that push by teachers was a big deal last year. It caused a lot of change.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that there are 8,700 vacant state government job positions, and then also if you wanted to kind of maybe not give that $33 million for merit-based pay, we did hear from budget writers, state economists saying that 1% pay raise for all state employees equals $21 million. So that's kind of where they are right now. So if you want to do 2%, it'd be 42, and so he's kind of somewhere in the middle, and again, merit-based pay is different, whereas they control what goes to certain employees.
Well, and to briefly bring another item from the governor's budget into this discussion, he would like to end the state pension program on December 31st, 2020. In other words, with this defined benefit that you get, and shift it more into a 401k program. So that will affect how a lot of state employees too. I mean, if you're going to go on a hiring binge, then you have to compute that into everything. I mean, South Carolina's unfunded pension liability is north of $20 billion right now, and that's an issue that's always floating over everybody's head, even if it doesn't get discussed a lot.
Yeah, and that's something that they have to consider, and that's something they've mentioned. But again, when we talk about all the priorities of the session, pension reform is there. It's phase 2 of the pension reform, but it's how much of it is there?
Lawmakers have known that it's been there for a while, and we haven't seen a whole lot of movement, at least in the chambers, on it in the last couple of years. I mean, outside of committees.
And if you're not one of the true believers, eyes tend to glaze over. I mean, it's a problem. It doesn't go away, but it's a lot easier for me to say, they need to give this state employee a raise because they can barely feed their family, versus, we have this mandate that's 20 years into the future that we need to deal with, or else. That's way off in the distance.
Yeah, and additional money for the pension is one of those things that we were talking about that comes kind of right off the top with this budget. It's about $30 million to help shore it up.
Too, for a lot of people, like looking at a $24 billion unfunded liability is really very difficult for you to kind of like wrap your arms around that. That's a lot to chew on. It's easier for, I'm sure, a lot of lawmakers to look at, $31 million for pay raises versus a $24 billion unfunded liability, trying to solve that in the matter of, 5-6 months, in an election year as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. And hopefully, since the market's been doing so well, maybe that unfunded liability gap has shrunk some, but I haven't really caught up with those guys at the Retirement Commission. But Maayan, I want to speak with other big gaping liabilities in the state, and we're talking about the prisons. McMaster does fund about $100 billion for prisons, and also additional money for health services and gang enforcement. It's interesting to see him putting this money in, and I'm wondering, is this going to be also a big year for prisons compared to just some of the money that they've thrown at them over the years, piecemeal?
I think so. I mean, Brian Sterling, the head of the state's prison systems, has been on State House grounds repeatedly over the last couple of years, particularly after the prison riot where 7 inmates died. I think that Brian Sterling has a good relationship with the legislature. He has a good relationship, obviously, with the governor's office. And I would imagine that his lobbying efforts have been very successful. We've heard the House Ways and Means Chairman, Merle Smith, talk about putting more money toward the prison systems. They're aware of the problems. I think it was the governor's office who reminded us that some inmates are able to open and close the doors on their own. I mean, those are glaring issues that have come about because the state hasn't funded the Department of Corrections. I would guess, I think it's safe to assume that there is going to be a whole chunk of money. Whether it's $100 million, I'm not sure, but I think there's going to be a greater emphasis than what we saw in the budget last year.
And just speaking with you while we wrap up the budget and get into some other top issues of session, Maayan, you guys at the state did a big takeout piece on transparency in the budget, and we're hearing from more and more lawmakers in leadership positions, and the governor even talking about wanting more transparency in the in the budget process, because sometimes it does get a little convoluted. Things do kind of get tucked away, and then all of a sudden an agency gets a check for a certain amount of money, and they're like, how did this get here? No one knew about it. So kind of tell us a little bit about that little project you guys worked on and what we're hearing from lawmakers in terms of making this process more transparent.
Yeah, so there's a really big push right now to end roll-ups, earmarks, whatever you want to call it. It's these vague budget line items that typically have the word grant maybe attached to them, where hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars flows into, and they're dispersed into checks for a lawmaker's particular district. They've gone to nonprofits, they've gone to local governments to help fix fire stations, other needs. I mean, a lot of these things maybe are our needs, but the problem is, or the question is, should they be rolled up into one line item where a lawmaker or a taxpayer doesn't know where that money is going? Or should they be a separate line item that lawmakers can vote individually on? And as we reported, I mean, this got started because Senator Dick Harpootlian, a Democrat from Richland, raised some fire about it after he received a check for quiet zones on the railroad. So I think there's a big push. The governor's office has clearly backed it. House Ways and Means Chairman Merle Smith has backed it. We've seen Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey back it. So I certainly think that this year we're going to see, on top of a debate on how to spend this extra money, there's going to be this added debate about how to put these particular projects on line items. It's going to make the legislative debate over the budget just a little bit spicier, I think, than
like
previous
we heard from
years.
Shane Massey say it's going to be a little bit more than 3 days this year in the Senate. So, Jeffrey, I also want to mention that there's going to be money in the budget for deferred maintenance on college campuses, and the governor's also proposing that tuition freeze again, like we saw in the previous bill last year. But I want to switch to the education bill since we're kind of running out of time here. Where are we right now with the Senate education bill? It sounds like it's on the Senate floor. They had all their meetings last year. It sounds like they finally geared up to this point where they're going to start debating this big bill. And like we heard from Maayan, it's really not this overarching big overhaul reform of the system, but just some tweaks here that are meant to help teachers out. Where are we right now with that bill, and where's this going?
It looks like it'll probably come to a vote probably sometime this upcoming week. You know, the first week of session, they started debate on Wednesday on it. You know, they explained what the bill was all about, went very carefully through every section. I think the Thursday, the last day of this week, will be spent talking a little bit more about the bill, answering some more questions. This, and even Greg Hembry with the Education Committee, even Senate Education Committee, points out this is not a reform bill. This is just kind of making sure that we modernize some language and just get things a little more modernized. The real change, if it comes this session, and that's a huge if, I mean, because this is a big debate, will be in smaller individual bills that come through this year. And I mean, there's a lot of things that haven't been talked about. There's the Teacher Bill of Rights. I think there will be a big debate from the conservative side of things about expanding voucher programs and money that can go to students who want to go to private school or take private options. I think we've got, a huge discussion over class size that'll come up, and a lot of more philosophical education debates. What's important to us when we try to educate South Carolina's children? So education, like it dominated the 2019 session, it's going to dominate the 2020 session too, no doubt.
Yeah, and what we're seeing right now, just to kind of give you an overview in that bill, they're going to remove some certain tests. As it stands right now in the bill, there's going to remove some tests in middle school, extend the calendar by 5 professional days for teachers. That is, if it's funded, that would be in addition to any pay raises. Looking at making the school start date to August 8th. Again, that sounds like it might be the biggest point of contention.
That might be their biggest fight. I mean, I've been around South Carolina 20 years. You bring up school start date, and it's just like a barroom brawl scene suddenly erupts.
And then, so, I mean, it's a lot going on. It's everyone's vacation time still, and then also reading coaches and reading interventionists. So a lot of different little things that we'll see debated in the coming weeks, and that's something we're going to be following. But do we know if the SC Fred group has any thoughts on maybe what's been proposed at this point, Maayan?
Oh, they don't want it to pass at all. They've actually kind of started this campaign over the last few days after the bill was put on special order, asking their members to call their senator and vote no on the bill. But their frustrations are not just because of the time of the bill. I mean, this starts over the past year when they felt like the House didn't listen to them early on when they actually wrote the bill. So I would guess, I think we're safe to guess that their frustrations are going to continue through this year, and they're going to fight to make sure that this bill doesn't get passed. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that's something we heard from Senate Education Committee Chairman Greg Hembry yesterday say, hey, if you're saying that you haven't had enough input on this bill, we had all these meetings both in the House and the Senate, and we've done everything we can, so this is your input at work here, and there's a lot of benefits in this bill. But Jeffrey, are those claims substantiated in this bill?
Well, I think there's going to be some, I think there are, I think Greg Hembry probably said it best. He said that there's going to be something in this bill for everyone to hate. Yeah. And that's because it is a 60-plus page bill. I mean, there's so much going on. One interesting thing to keep an eye on is SC Fred has set a March 17th deadline for a list of things that they want accomplished, some of which have to be done in the budget, which won't be done by the 17th. It's just impossible with the rules of the House and Senate to have a budget out that early. That'll be interesting to see how much pressure, again, do they put on this year. I mean, again, can they continue that momentum? I mean, teachers did get a significant salary bump, and I think that's a big concern of theirs is pay. And sometimes, I think especially some people that want to tamp down this grassroots effort, they're hoping that pay bump is what kind of pacifies at least maybe the people that aren't quite as enthusiastic about, following the legislative process and everything. So it'll be interesting to see when we come to March, can they bring together, are they going to have another rally at the State House? If they have it early enough, can they shut down schools? That's more school districts. That would seem to be a possibility if they can get the numbers.
And I think we should, and we've talked about this, keep in mind that March 17th deadline is the day after filing opens for State House seats.
Again, we have all 124 House members and all 46 senators up for re-election this year. That happens every 4 years because senators are up every 4 years, House members up every 2 years. A lot of different action, a lot of different angles at play there. We have about 5 minutes left. We have to talk about Santee Cooper, Jeffrey. We'll talk about it briefly now before later in the session when it's supposed to really kind of come up. What's the status of that? Can you kind of give us an overview about what's going on there and what we can expect in the future in terms of dealing with Santee Cooper's future?
There was a deadline this past week that the Department of Administration was supposed to take in all the bids and everything. They did get an extension from that. So sometime before mid-March, the Department of Administration will submit a report that says, here is the best bid to buy Santee Cooper, here's the best bid to manage Santee Cooper, and here's Santee Cooper's offer, what they promise to do if they're allowed to continue to run themselves. And that will probably grind a lot of debate to a halt over there at the legislature, because they're going to have, senators and House members are going to have to assess all those bids, determine what's the best thing, and everybody's got a huge stake in that. I mean, especially in the Senate. I mean, there are people that are very passionate that Santee Cooper must be sold. The state has no business in the utility business. It's only a drain to taxpayers, and the $4 billion, $5 billion worth of debt is just too much.
Because of the VC Summer project that they were partnered with SCG
Yes,
on.
the money that they paid for the nuclear plant that never even generated a watt of energy. On the other side, you have a lot of people that will defend Santee Cooper until the end. I mean, this is a company created during the Great Depression, brought electricity to a lot of South Carolina that never had electricity. And so, it goes back a long ways and has a lot in the fiber of this state. And so, yeah, when you have people that are that passionate on either side and rules in the Senate that don't limit debate, that could take weeks and weeks and weeks of time sometime in the spring.
And speaking of passionate debate and also people that could talk for a long time about an issue, we're talking about the abortion debate. We have a minute left. I want to just talk about this really quick. We saw a big rally in the State House this week, pro-life rally, in support of that fetal heartbeat abortion ban bill. Jeffrey, just really quick, because since you cover abortion so much, is this going anywhere? We've heard from Senate Majority Leader Shane Massey that there's no votes for this to get passed in the Senate.
It was an unusually large crowd for that rally at the State House that want the heartbeat abortion bill passed. So it'll be interesting to see if they can put pressure on. Again, it's an election year, and if abortion may be the issue in South Carolina that most affects elections, especially if you're a less conservative Republican, suddenly you might have a very conservative Republican taking you on in a primary, which is a much smaller group of people that you need to appeal to. And they made the abortion rally folks yesterday made their point that they're watching and they're voting. And so, we'll see. I don't know if if the bill itself will come up for a debate, but it will certainly come up briefly, at least in the budget. There's always an abortion debate in the budget.
Yeah, and then we'll definitely see the governor at his State of the State address next week talk about all these issues, including the budget. And I know we'll all be paying attention to that. And thanks to Jeffrey and Maayan for being here today. And thank you for joining us. Also, check out the South Carolina Lead. It's a political podcast that can be found on your podcast app on any mobile device. Each week, I recap the weekly political news with reporters who cover it. From the Kennedy Greenhouse Studio on the campus of the University of South Carolina, I'm Gavin Jackson.